Time to enter Patzer's playground. Okay, our hero of this game was black. So we got a Sicilian. H3, a little weird. Alright, so now he makes this move bishop b5, which is weird. Why would you waste a tempo just to attack the knight? Okay, black has two bishops. Okay, again, exchanging off his other bishop for the knight. Not the best. So sometimes amateurs will get into these kind of, you know, think that, oh, knights are better than bishops, so I should get rid of my bishops. But yeah, I mean, white's basically wasted time in order to get his superior minor pieces off the board. Okay, but nothing bad's happened yet to white. I mean, okay, he's made a couple of ill-advised exchanges, lost some time in the opening with h3 and moving his bishop twice, but okay, he hasn't made any blunders yet, right? Okay, so white defends his pawn. So the question is, as black, you know, what should you be thinking about here? And the answer is, we should be thinking about how to try to punish white for his play. Not the best play from white so far, and black's done, you know, played very normal moves. So what should black do here to try to maybe punish white's insolence a bit? So what do you guys think? What should black play here? So we want to try to attack targets. A natural target would be this b2 pawn. So a good move might be queen b6. And it actually turns out it's not easy for white to defend this pawn. Because what happens if queen e2, for example? What can black play on queen e2? Look for tactics, guys. Yeah, very good. So the move here is c4. The point is, if white captures, black can take here, because this queen is overloaded. If queen takes bishop, queen takes pawn, and this rook is lost. And if white castles, then pawn takes pawn, and again, the queen is overworked. So again, already black is starting to threaten some things. And notice that, for example, if white plays this move queen b3, what should black play here? So here black should obviously avoid exchanging queens and play the move queen to a6, again, with the target. And notice that, say, you know, queen c2, bishop b5, c4, bishop c6, but now notice what's opened. This diagonal. And now b2 again is a target. So subtle little things like that to make your opponent's position worse are things that need to come into account. Because as black, you should realize that white has played this game suboptimally to this point. Okay, some of you guys suggested this move d5. The problem with d5 is that it actually allows white to lock it up. So after e5, bishop moves back, and now say a move like maybe d4, maybe even castling first. But the point is, closed position will favor the knights, not the bishops. So this is exactly what white wants. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so black plays move king f8. I'm probably guessing he meant to castle, but he played king f8 instead. So it was a mouse slip. But again, it's not something disastrous, because now he should just play king g7 and castle manually. Okay. But he plays d5. Okay, take. Take. Okay, queen takes is good. Pawn takes pawn was a mistake, obviously. What should white do here? As an exercise. So we want to accomplish two things with our move, right? So our pawn's attacked. Can we do two things with this move? Oops. Let me draw a correct arrow. So can white do two things with his move? He can. He can develop, and he can defend the pawn. So of course, knight bd2 would be correct. Yeah, here e5 is a bit of a problem. Bishop g7, and now on d4, maybe queen b6. And I can always play f6 to kind of challenge it. But okay, so he took, which was incorrect because it lets black's queen get into the center. Okay, so now white just hangs a pawn. Black takes it. Okay, so here, what should black do here? He's up a pawn. He's got nice bishops. White's knights are kind of just stuck defending each other. What should black do here? Bishop takes f3 is a big strategic mistake. Why trade this guy for this guy? This is white's worst piece on d2, and this is probably black's best piece on f3, or sorry, on c6. So why trade this guy for this guy? No reason. What's black's worst piece? You guys have to ask yourself, what's black's worst piece, and try to make it better. So what's black's worst piece? Very good. This guy. So how do we make him better? How do we make this h rook better? Yeah, very good. King g7. So one, it kind of safeguards our king a bit because it puts him into this nice little hole. But two, it actually gets this rook getting ready to go to d8. So king g7. Always activate your pieces. And always ask what your worst piece is and try to make it better. So this is actually a form of development in a way. Of course, black should have castled instead of playing king f8, but, you know, it wasn't a horrible mouse slip. He can still recover. He's still much better here, up a pawn, two great bishops. But okay, he played c4. So he's trying to be tricky. The idea was he wanted to try to ruin white's pawn structure at the cost of a pawn, but I don't see why. Why give up a pawn for nothing? You don't have to. Okay, so white took. Okay. So now black gave up a pawn. What should black do here? What should black do here? This move that he played actually turns out to be okay, but what should black do here? Okay, well now there's something more important to do before we play king g7. And the thing to notice is notice this rook and notice this knight. They're on the same diagonal. So the best move is to play bishop b5, pinning the knight to the rook. Yeah, and this actually wins material because now after b3, this guy hangs. But at the very least, even if this pawn didn't hang, there's really no way to defend that guy now. I mean, if knight d2, I can play bishop g5 or even just take on c3, but... Sorry, Higgs. Okay. So, this is what black should have done. But he takes on f3. And now, what's the problem with taking on f3? Oops. Sorry. So what's the problem with taking with f3 here? Well, the problem is you don't win a pawn anymore. But let me just ask what the difference is between... Right, okay, but what's the difference between these pawns and... Assume this was not hanging. And these pawns. There's a crucial difference between this pawn structure and the pawn structure that white got in the game. Can someone tell me what that difference is? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the difference is the pawns are on these two squares are equally weak, but they're more difficult to attack because this file is blocked up. Whereas these pawns lie on this open file, and so they're very easy to attack with the rook. So there's a big difference between a weakness and being able to target the weakness. So, you know, if you could have weaknesses all over your position, but if your opponent can't actually physically exploit those weaknesses, they don't become so weak anymore. So, I mean, without question, in this position, these pawns are terrible, right? These pawns are all very bad. They're weak. But can you think of a concrete plan to actually attack any one of these pawns that doesn't take at least, 5 moves and that can't be very easily defended? I mean, okay, you can play rook d8, rook d3 or something. I can just play king g2 then. And, okay, nothing. So it's very important that when you have a weakness, that it's also something that can be easily targeted. So black failed to appreciate that fact, and now somehow white has achieved equality, even though he hasn't really made a good move the entire game. Okay. So rook c8. And now white should move this knight back. Probably to e3. Because again, if he defends this knight, then this pawn on c3 falls. Okay, so let's just ask about this position just quickly in general. Okay, so who has the better pawn structure? White or black? Yeah, okay, quite obviously it's black because black has 2 pawn islands. So this is 1 pawn island. And this is another pawn island. White has 3, including these kind of ugly pawns. Okay, who has the superior minor piece? Who has the superior minor piece? White or black? Okay, it's probably black. It's probably black. It's not a huge difference, but with pawns on both sides of the board, the bishop will tend to be better than the knight. So I'd say black is better. What one thing does white have going for him in this position? Yeah, very good. Very good. So actually it's 2 things. Yeah, you guys are absolutely right. It's actually 2 things. So one, his rooks are connected, so they can find open files a little bit easier. It's going to take black a move or 2 to kind of fix it. But something that's also very important is in endgames, this queenside pawn majority idea. So notice that these 3 pawns can force a pass pawn against these 2. I mean, assuming they were just kings on the board, white could play c4, b4, c5, b5, and c6, and by force get a pass pawn. Whereas for black, it's not so easy to see how he can create a pass pawn by force. Even though he has a 4 versus 3 edge on this king side, I'm not exactly sure how he can create a pass pawn by force. So it's important, this idea of being able to create a pass pawn, because a passed pawn requires a lot of attention, or else it becomes a queen. Whereas these pawns, even though they're superior in number to these three, white won't have to worry about them for quite some time. So again, it's kind of a minor thing, but it means that this position is roughly equal, even though the black has some major things going for him. Okay, but of course white plays b3. So free pawn, bishop f6, okay, knight a5, and now black is being forked. If you guys notice, it's kind of a tricky way of forking, but he's actually being forked this way. So what should black do to meet that? So forks can come in different ways. Yeah, rook b8 is something you never want to play. Rook b8 is a move you never want to play. Why? Because this rook becomes passive for the rest of the game, and now after rook c7, white's actually better. So rook b8 is a move you never want to play. And king g7 just hangs a pawn, so the right move is to take and play b6, which is exactly what black did. So notice he was being forked, but he made a move that was actually stronger than white's other threat. So I mean, this is, not a threat that you need to take super seriously, but so he removes one attack and then he defends the other one. Very good. So knight c6 attacks this pawn. a5 was a good move, defends the pawn. a4 gets his king moved so his rook can get into the game finally. Notice it took him 23 moves to do this. A little bit too long. I mean, of course, he should have castled at the beginning, but it shouldn't have taken him 23 moves to make king g7. Okay, so rook d1, rook c8 attacking the knight, rook c3 forking all the pawns, and now black is very close to winning because all his pawns are easily defensible. His bishop does a good job defending the pawns, and these pawns are ripe for picking. So after rook b1, rook takes f3, here white resigned. And justifiably so. He is currently down 2 pawns. This rook is ultra passive, so it can never really move. And black's rook is super active. Next stage would be for black to get his king into the game, eventually to get to b4, and then win b3. Nope, no super turnaround. This one was a kind of a quick one. Don't worry, guys. If you want some super turnarounds, wait for the next one. Okay? So does that one make sense? Nothing too earth-shattering there, but black could have won that game much more cleanly if he had just realized which knight to take. Yeah, white did not know he was in the playground. Okay, this next one, I don't think either guy knew what playground they were in, to be quite honest. Okay, so let's look at this one now. Yeah. So that one was straightforward, but again, a couple of key concepts like that queen b6 would have really helped black kind of maintain the advantage. And then once white hung that pawn on d3, not playing that move c4 and giving the pawn back and just continuing to pressure with king g7 and getting a rook out. So, okay, so part 2, our hero in this game has the white pieces. Let's see how things turned out. Okay, so we got e4, e5. Knight f3, bishop d6. Okay. Already a bit of an awkward move. So why is this move so awkward? What particularly bad does it do? What particularly bad does it do? Blocks it in. What's it? It blocks in several things, to be honest. One, it blocks in the bishop, right? It doesn't have much of a future here or here. 2, it blocks in this pawn, which means this bishop can't get out. It blocks in this queen, kind of, because again, this pawn can't get out. So it blocks in a lot of stuff. So this is not a good move, right? We can all agree it's not a good move. Yeah, but really, he's really hurting his brother more than he's hurting himself at the moment. But okay, so let's see what white does. So white plays bishop c4, perfectly fine. Castle, perfectly fine. If knight takes, you have rook e1 and win the pawn back. So, okay, so castle. So now he defends the pawn. Okay, b6. So okay, he realizes, well, I can't get my bishop out this way, so I'll get my bishop out this way. This is definitely not a standard way to develop your pieces in the king pawn opening, for sure. Okay. So, what should white play here? Because clearly white's played better moves than black so far, right? But again, has black made like a blunder? I don't know if I'd go that far. But what should white play here? So again, a little bit of a tactical thing. White should just play d4 here. He's better developed than black, I would say. At least his pieces do more than black's pieces. So opening up the center is not necessarily a bad thing. So what's the problem for black? So why can't he do this, for example? This is a very important thing that happens a lot in these openings that you always have to be watching out for. So of course, if black takes this pawn, white responds with a fork, forking these two guys. And another reason why this bishop on d6 is badly placed, because it's susceptible to a fork. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, so now you guys might ask, okay, well, why can't I just develop and defend that pawn with knight c6? Okay, seems reasonable enough. So what should white do here now? What should white do here? There's something very specific that white can do here. And it's a bit of a tricky thing because it's not the most obvious thing to do. Apparently it's not obvious at all because not a single person has gotten it. So the right thing to do is actually, you want to continue to gain time. So the way to gain time in this position is to simply just take a bunch of times and play f4. And now notice black has a little bit of a problem, right? Because his bishop only has one square to go to. But be careful. But be careful. It's not as clear as you think, because this move does not work. Why doesn't it work? Right. So one thing that happens in tactics sometimes is you do something that creates a threat, but your opponent can do something that creates a stronger threat. So e5 does definitely threaten two things, but the problem with it is that black can do something even stronger. And what he can do is he can simultaneously move one piece and threaten something stronger. So the stronger thing he can do is threaten the king.
Check.
So check, and now white would be forced to respond to it somehow, say with bishop d3, and then take,
Check.
take, and knight e8. And okay, I mean, white is definitely for choice, but he doesn't win by force. He doesn't win by force. Okay. Notice that if black tries this move bishop to b4, we can again threaten two pieces with c3. But again, bishop c5 will save both of them. Okay, but there's actually something that we can do better in this position. And that move is actually to play bishop e3. And now we actually are threatening e5. And the question is, why can't black take this pawn? The answer is we have some more forks. We have some more forks. So everyone is right. Everyone is right. We have two ways to do it. We have this way to do it, which forks, and we have this way to do it, which also forks. So both ways work. Both ways work. I might prefer to do it with the bishop, but it doesn't matter. Either way works. So after this move, bishop e3, it's kind of tougher for black to stop this move e5. So white should be much better. But okay, so that was after d4. white played c3 instead, thinking he had to prepare d4. So again, time is of the essence in chess, because by wasting a move, you let black kind of consolidate his position a bit, and now d4 doesn't have nearly the same effect as it did. Okay. So black plays bishop b7, queen c2 again. Now black had time to take this pawn, so white had to defend it. Knight g4, not exactly the best move. h3, good move. Just kicking knight back. So now d4. Okay. So white wasted a couple moves, but it's not like black did anything super great. So white's still in pretty good shape here. Okay, take. So what do we do? How do we recapture back? This one should be hopefully obvious to you guys, but let's just make sure we know. Okay, so a little bit of a trick here. What happens on this move, by the way? What happens on e5? A little bit of a trick. So yeah, there's tricks abound here. So the point is, e5 doesn't quite work because you can take. And now notice that the only thing defending this pawn is this rook. So is there a way we can maybe make it so this pawn is immobilized? So that it would not be able to capture either way. Right. You can play a move like rook e8. And now it's a dual threat, right? We're threatening to simultaneously defend against this double attack and also threatening to simply take. Okay, of course white could take on d4, and then we move our bishop out of the way or something. And then he defends his rook, and then we move our knight out of the way. Or we play d5. I mean, whatever. But, okay, this doesn't actually win material. And our king side is a bit ruined. So the correct answer is, yeah, we should take back, and we should take back with the pawn, which is what white did, which is good. Okay, notice how he maintains this duo in the center, which is good. He's also threatening e5 for real now. And notice that a move, I should have probably mentioned the move before, but notice something like this. Oops. So notice something like this would be good for white, because in this type of position, two minor pieces will be better than the rook. So white can just, continue developing and even generate an attack on the king, because without those two minor pieces, those are probably black's two best pieces. So now black would have to play something like this, we play something like this, and we play bishop g5 next, rook d1, maybe e5, and maybe, queen h4, bishop d3, start attacking the king. But in general, two pieces are going to be better than a rook and a pawn in the middle game. So just a quick note on that. So that was actually possible the previous move as well, but just wanted to mention that. Okay, so black plays bishop b4, which just helps white, right? So what should white do? I mean, actually, white can do anything here, but what's the point of why this move isn't good? Yeah, basically no matter what white does, he's basically going to develop. So either knight c3, bishop d2, either one is perfectly fine. And yeah, the point is now, he's just helping white to develop. So white develops, which is perfectly reasonable. Capture, and again, defending this pawn, again, perfectly reasonable. Okay, d5. So black striking back in the center. White plays bishop d3, good move. Take, 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 take. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this position. Who has the better pawn structure? Material is even, obviously. Who has the better pawn structure? Black. True. Who has the better pieces? Yeah, it's true. This is a weakness of sorts. Who has the better pieces? White or black? Okay, good. White. Okay, so who's better in this position? White or black? White by far. I would agree. So yeah, this pawn structure weakness, okay, if you get into an endgame, maybe it's a problem. But White's pieces are so active at the moment that I would definitely consider White to be better. He can easily double on the e-file. C7 is actually a target, as much of a target as d4 is. And the activity of White's pieces just far outweighs the fact this pawn is weak. Does anyone have argument with that? Because being able to quickly evaluate these positions in favor of one person or the other is really important. Because, for example, if White knew that this position was worse for him, he probably wouldn't have gone into this whole exchange, right? So you should be able to, within a couple of seconds, realize that White's much better here, even though technically his pawns are worse. And no problem, ask. So is that clear? That White's better here because his pieces are much more active? I mean, look, every single piece Black owns is on its original square. So Black's position is somewhat compact. But again, White's pieces are much better. Okay. So knight a6. Okay. So now, what square is most important to control right now? What's the most important square to control? If you guys watch the pawn videos, you should know. The most important square to control is always the square in front of the isolated pawn. So what square is that? What square is that? It's this one. Why is this square so important to control? Because when this square is under control by either side, if White has it under control, he always threatens to push and create more space. And so, for example, if White had this square under control, he could play d5 at some point, knight d4, knight c6, get more pieces into the game. And every square the pawn pushes forward creates more space for White. Conversely, if Black has it under control, then he can easily stop the pawn, and he can bring more pieces to bear on the pawn and force White to defend it. So, what should White do here? What should White do here? Once you know what he should do, it becomes pretty clear what he should, what move he should make. Rook d1 does nothing to control this square. I just told you guys you want to control d5. How does Rook d1 control d5? Black has a very strong positional threat right now. Black's positional threat is to play knight b4 and knight d5. And this knight is going to be golden on d5. This knight will defend c7. It'll blockade this pawn. And I would say Black's better if Black can get his knight to d5. So we have to stop that at all costs. So how do we do that? Well, again, you want to do a move to do two things, right? Two things. So you want to attack and you want to defend. Very good. Very good. But you guys should have seen that quickly. Attack and defend. Yeah, queen c4 is correct. Queen c4 is correct. Now notice this knight's a bit of a silly piece. Probably has to go back to b8. But more importantly, you're controlling d5, getting ready to play rook c1. Also attacking f7 maybe, so knight e5, and then this rook is stuck on this square. All sorts of things. Queen c4 gives the queen the greatest mobility. Okay, well, White didn't play that. White played rook d1. It looks reasonable, but actually Black can now have this knight b4 d5 idea, and probably Black's better. But Patzer's playground, so he plays queen d5. Not a bad move. Blockades as well, but he prefers... What's the best blockading piece, guys? What piece works the best to blockade a path pawn? It's not this one. Like this one, yeah. Knights are much better. Okay, so he's using the wrong piece, but... Okay, a3. So defending his pawn. Stopping knight b4. Rook d8. Okay. So, what should white play here? Again, what square should white fight for? Queen c4. Queen c4 hang a queen? No thanks. What square should white fight for? Yeah, should fight for d5. How should he fight for d5? Rook e5. Very good. So rook e5 actually does two things. It's a little bit of an attack and a defense. It attacks this square, but notice also that it takes the rook off of this square. And why is that important? Because the only thing defending that rook was the queen. So the queen was kind of tied down because the rook was on e4. But now the rook is on a square where it's defended multiple times. So now the queen is free to do what it pleases. It can go to f5, it can go to c4 if the queen moves off of it, go to d3, it can go to e2, it can do a variety of things. But notice that this rook move not only frees this rook along this whole rank, but it also frees the queen because the queen no longer has to guard it. So sometimes when you can actually free a piece by not moving it itself, but moving something that that piece defends. So rook e5 would have definitely been for choice for white. Unfortunately, white played this move, queen d3. And now, unfortunately, black to move and win. Let's put our tactics hats on. Black to move and win. Do we see it? Do we see it? So, of course, knight c5. And we're exploiting a little thing called a fork and a pin. So it's a little pin fork. So we got a fork, and we got a pin. So no matter what, white's losing the exchange here. But this is Patzer's playground. So, white to move and win. White to move and win. I mean, Patzer's playground, we're going to go on the merry-go-round. So white to move and win. Tactics hats. Tactics hats. Alright, come on, guys. This guy's hanging. e4 is hanging. You can't take a6. Just kidding. I don't think you were just kidding. You can't take the knight. You hang your rook. Rook e5, I can defend the knight. So again, double attack, guys. Double attack. Rook h4. So now we're threatening mate, and we're threatening the knight. And white wins. Okay. So the only way to defend against the mate is play f5 or g6 or h6, and no matter what you play, I just take the knight. So again, it's an attack and defense. It's defending the rook, but simultaneously also attacking two things. Queen h7 and queen a6. Alright, but again, Patzer's playground, so of course white played the move, rook e5. Not bad. Not bad, but not best. It also lets black play this move that he played, which is c4. Okay. So what has white gained out of all this all of a sudden? White has gained something. What has white gained? I don't know if I'm asking that a little too subtly, but yeah. Okay, I guess it wasn't too subtly. Yeah, very good. So suddenly this pawn became what? It became passed. Very good. It's not protected. Protected would mean there was a pawn here or a pawn here. It is passed though. Very important. Okay. So the question is, should white exchange queens or not? So should white take the queen and then take or no? This is tricky. This is not easy. So normally, a passed pawn becomes more of an advantage in an endgame. But in this case, right, so something to consider is the fact that, okay, after take, I guess take, white wins a pawn, right? But turns out that you actually shouldn't trade queens. And the reason is, after queen c2, we're going to actually win a pawn anyway. Because it's going to be very difficult for black to actually hold on to this pawn. So really the only square that black can go to hold the pawn is queen c6. And now something like d5. Queen c7. Queen e4. And now rook e7 is a threat. And we're going to win at least a pawn, if not more. Notice this knight can't go to c5 because the queen takes c4. So black's in a lot of trouble here. But okay, white ended up taking the pawn, which is not the worst thing in the world. But queen c2 would have been more accurate. Because with the queens on, it's actually easier to push the pawn forward. Because you can create threats on black's king while threatening to push the pawn. Without queens, it's much harder to do that. And black can kind of focus on stopping the pawn, because really, white's pieces can't do much else. So it's a subtle point, but something that you can find useful for other positions as well. Okay, so he took and took and took. Okay, fine. All right, so what should white do here? He's up a pawn. Clear as day. It's a pass pawn. What should white do? Control d5. Well, that seems impossible. Yeah, so he can't control d5 anymore, unfortunately. So what should he do? What's job 1 in an endgame in general? Job 1 in an endgame is to activate this guy. Yeah. So he's got everything defended. He's got his pieces on pretty much the best squares they're going to be. This knight defends his pawn, this rook defends his pawn. It's easy to switch over this rook. Notice that a move like rook c3 doesn't do anything, just knight d5. And this rook has nowhere to go on the c file, like rook c6 doesn't do anything. And notice that rook c7 is defended against. And actually knight defends against both entries. But yeah, king activity. So king f1 would be the move. But white played this pseudo-active knight e5, which actually doesn't do anything. He thought it might threaten like a knight c6, but the rook can defend the 7th rank with rook d7. So after knight b5, d5... He should have probably played knight d5, but whatever. He managed to push the pawn. Okay, f6, knight c6. Okay, rook d6. Okay, so what should white play here? Knight to b4. a4? a4? Okay. Well, what happens on a4? Always check. So what's the point of a4? Well, what's the only thing defending this? This guy. So if we can remove that guy, we can take that guy. So yeah, a4 actually wins. Point is, after knight c7, we're actually happy to trade this pawn for this pawn. So knight takes a7, and now rook takes d5 is forced. Notice that if knight takes d5, this pin is forever, and we can actually just win this knight with knight b5 and knight c3. So he has to take with the rook, and now we go into a knight ending. After knight takes, we just play king f1, and then our idea is just to go here, 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 and here. And actually there's not much black can do, because we'll have this extra pass pawn on the outside. So this should be a win for white. But okay, so he played knight b4. Then back to c6. Okay, so in this position he should have played here, because it's much easier to defend this pawn from this square. So he should have moved his knight back to c2 and rerouted it to e3. And then from e3 he can play like rook b3 maybe, and then get his king in. But he should have gotten his king in to begin with. Okay, but he played knight c6, and now it's almost impossible to defend the pawn, because after knight e7, it's really hard to defend this pawn. Okay, so white missed a little tricky resource he had, which was to play this move, knight to c8. So the point is you're forking these. You can't really take on b6 though, because for example, after rook takes d5, my rook is hanging, so I have no time to take this. And if rook takes, knight takes, and all of a sudden notice this knight defends this pawn. But here, in this position, what should white play? Again, we want to do some sort of fork here. And so the fork we do is we play rook e3. Rook e3. Notice that rook c3 runs into knight b5 when we're gaining tempo. And rook b3 runs into b5 when, again, you win nothing. But rook e3, the point is we're threatening this and we're threatening this. And he can't actually stop both. So we win our pawn back and we remain up a pawn. But black has much more activity because his rook is nice and active, so he can probably play like rook d2, and then it's tricky. It's probably a draw. But only white could possibly win here. But it is definitely tricky, because you would have to see this move rook e3. Knight d6 check actually doesn't do anything after king e6. Now black is much better, because his king is very active. Not required to take. Okay, but this was just a possibility, and again, it's difficult to see that this knight c8 actually can win a pawn back. Okay, so he played knight f5. Okay, and here it's pretty much a draw. Black actually has a slightly better king, but white can probably combat that, and it should probably be a draw. Okay, so he gets his king in, and now g6, which doesn't really make much sense. Well, I guess he wanted to move the pawn off of where it can be taken. Okay, so where should the knight go? Where should the knight go? Well, we want to prevent black's king from centralizing, and the natural centralizing move would be king e6. So to stop black from centralizing, we want to put the knight on d4. Yeah. So it centralizes the knight, but more importantly, it stops the king from getting into the center. Yeah. So white unfortunately plays move knight d6, which just helps the king get to the center. So now king e6, and now basically wasted a couple of tempi for nothing. Because notice this pawn is defended. Every pawn is defended. So now black is actually better. Okay, so h5. He probably should have moved his knight. Or actually, probably should have played king d7 to play king c6 and king c5. Also, a4 would have been good here for black to kind of fix these pawns and then bring his king around. h5 is a little bit of a waste of time. King e2. Okay, so he finally plays a4, which is good. g3, stopping knight f4, which was good. Okay, b5, knight d2, okay, b4. Okay, what should white play here now? Okay, so how many moves does it take white to attack this pawn at the moment? Two. And how many moves does it take black to attack this pawn? The answer is infinity. The answer is infinity. The black can never attack this pawn because the only knight squares he can use are this one, this one, this one, and this one, and they're all covered. The king covers these two, knight covers this one, there's a pawn on the fourth one. So he can never attack this pawn, actually. I meant with the knight, obviously, not with the pawn. Yeah, I mean, obviously not with the pawn. So white should just take here, and then after take, just play knight e4, and then knight c3 and knight takes a4, and just win a pawn. Not much black can do to stop it. If he tries to defend with his knight, like knight a6 or something, then again, king d3, king c4. Notice on king d3, king d5, this is actually check.
Check.
And that just wins a pawn. So the king actually can't approach, which is the point. Okay, so he should definitely take. He played f4. Not the best move on the board. In fact, it's probably one of the top 5 worst moves on the board. So, in these endgames, it's important that you keep your pawns compact because you make them easier to defend. But now that he's played this move f4, what can black play here to really screw with what white's doing? So black can play this move h4. And now all of a sudden, white's pawn structure becomes completely fractured. If he takes here, then knight takes f4 and knight takes h3, and all of a sudden he's lost. So, of course, I take on a3 first. So I take on a3, then take on f4, then take on h3. So, this all was possible because white played this move f4, unfortunately. So he should have just kept his pawns compact and either taken or even, king d3 would have been fine too. But okay, so black took, white took.
Check.
Knight c3, not really sure what that's about. Helping white get his king in. Knight d1. Okay, so he's threatening knight f2, I guess. Forking the king and the pawn. Knight e4, oops. Knight e4, good move to stop knight f2. Okay, f5.
Check.
Knight c5 check. Now all of a sudden we get this pawn, which is good. Okay, so who's better here after, say,
check,
this move? So who is better in this position? White, black, or it's Josh? White, black, or shake hand? It's tricky, but white probably has an edge because this pawn is probably the most dangerous on the board. Notice that even if after black takes this pawn on h3, he can't create a passer for some time. So this outside pass pawn really gives white some serious chances. Black has a better king. This is true, but this outside pass pawn can only give chances for white. So white is definitely better, but not sure it's enough to win. So king e3, take.
check,
Check. Okay, now he plays a good move, a4. So notice if king takes knight, just a5, a6, a7, a8 is quite unstoppable. So he leaves the knight there smartly. It's kind of cute how the knight and pawn kind of defend each other in a way. Okay, black plays this move g5. King g2 is fine because it forces g4. This is all fine.
check,
Okay, this is good because now he's getting to get the f5 pawn and the h5 pawn. So he gets the f5 pawn. This is good. Okay. Now he attacks the h5 pawn, and black plays
check,
this move. So what happens after this move? Black has connected pass pawns, right? But who should win this? Who should win this? Nope. White wins by force. Yeah, it's pretty simple actually. Pretty simple. Okay, so we take h4, and now how does white win? Very simple. Yeah, black loses everything. Okay, so what should white do? This is pretty simple. Yeah, simply attack the pawn, knight f5, right? So now the only way to defend this pawn is play h3, then just
Check.
king g3. Now no matter what you do, I just take here. If you play h2, I just play here. And now notice the knight creates a barrier around this pawn. Very important. So the king can't even approach the pawn, if you notice. So now all white has to do is just play here, here. And then the knight and pawn obviously beat the king. So super simple. Super simple. Okay, white makes it a little bit harder for himself. He plays this move, knight h5. I don't know why he just didn't attack the pawn, but okay, he's still winning. Okay, so knight f6 attacking g4.
Check.
Okay, knight e4 check. Okay, so what should white do here? He's still winning, but he needs to exhibit some more finesse at this point. Yeah, obviously you take the pawn as a draw. So what should white play here? Knight d2 actually leads to a draw. Knight d2 actually leads to a draw, so be careful. Yeah, simply king f3. And the idea is we're going to reroute this knight from e4 to e3. So the point is we want to put the knight on e3 and again create the barrier. Notice that on knight on e3 protects this square and protects this square. So after king f5, knight d6,
Check.
king moves somewhere, we play knight c4, king moves back, we play knight e3.
Check.
Notice how we position our knight in the right square. And now notice the barrier has been formed. And now with the barrier being formed, we can simply play king g4, king takes pawn, king takes pawn. And if he plays g2, of course, we just take. If he plays h3, we just take. Notice our pawn's already cutely defended. Pretty simple. Once you know to put the knight on e3. But it's a nice maneuver in order to do that. Because again, we want to control this f5 square. But of course, white plays knight takes g3. And now this game is a draw. GG. Guess we can see how it finished. But yeah, this is a simple draw. King and pawn against king is a draw if the king can be in front. So white tried for a little bit. Actually, I can show you the rest, but I mean, they basically play on for 20 more moves, but I'll just show you how it should finish, assuming white just tries his hardest. Okay, so check here, here. Okay, now this is the one key point that black should know. Okay, where should black move? Only one move only one move draws. Pretty simple. So where should black move his king in this position? This is super simple, king and pawn ending stuff. But everyone should know this instantly. Like, you should be able to do this in like 2 seconds. Literally 2 seconds. You should be able to know this. So everyone knows, always move the king straight back. So the point is, if you play king here, for example, king here, f7, and now you have to go here, and I go here, and I win. So, and then similarly, if you go here, I don't go this way, but I go this way. So if I go this way, you go here, and this is a draw, of course. But I go this way, and then same thing, if you go this way, I play f7, if you go this way, I play f7, and then king e7, same thing. Okay, so yeah, king f8, of course, and then if king e6, you follow my king, same thing. And then if king g6, you follow my king. And then, of course, the way the game ends is f7,
Check.
king here, and the only way to defend the pawn is to play king f6, and that's stalemate. Black can't move, so draw. And so the game ended in a draw. So quite a few reversal of fortunes in that game. I guess a draw was a just result based on that. But we saw some improvements in all 3 phases of the game. If white played an early d4, that middle game with those back-to-back missed tactics, and then that end game where a cornucopia of errors starting from lack of king activity to pushing kings into the center to poor pawn moves. So a lot of food for thought, and hopefully if you guys didn't know some of the stuff that was in that game, it'll make you aware of it.